Hello ladies and gentlemen, Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios here. And today we're going to talk about how to get some real punch and weight out of recording a kick drum. Now, the reason that I'm doing this video today is because I have made a thing. I have made what's called a Subkick. So today we're going to talk about what it is, why you need one, and how to make one yourself. So a brief bit of backstory here. When you're recording a kick drum, traditionally you just use one microphone, and the choice of the microphone and the placement would make quite a big difference. But then recently I've seen in a lot of studios something like this hovering in front of a kick drum and wondered why. In modern production, you quite often want the punch of a kick drum, you want some attack, but you also want the weight from the kick drum, and it's quite difficult to get all of that from one single microphone. So one option is to use more than one microphone, but then you see this in a lot of studios, and I've seen this recently with bands like Dream Theater, their latest album. I saw one of these in front of the kick drum. Several bands recently, I'll see if I can put some photo examples here, and they've got one of these in front of the kick drum, and you think, what is that? I mean, this doesn't look quite like any of the others I've seen, but the idea is the same. What it is some genius engineer probably found out that by wiring an old spare Yamaha NS10 speaker in front of a kick drum and wiring it to an XLR and treating it like a microphone, you get a very deep, very full sound out of it. Because if you think about the way a microphone works, it's got a very small, very thin diaphragm that picks up all the sound, and the smaller the diaphragm is, the more accurate the sound is. So why not go the other way and have a stupidly large diaphragm and treat this like a microphone? What that does is you end up with something that can only really pick up low end, and it then naturally gives you that woomph, woomph kind of thing without you having to use any EQ or other methods, because of course when you start combining microphones and using too much EQ between them, you can really start to mess up phase and then not quite get a whole picture. So doing this just means that you can then blend in some low-end guts. Whoever did this originally, I'm not sure, but a lot of people copied them, and Yamaha saw this and made the Subkick. The Yamaha Subkick is literally just one of these speakers in a mounting bracket with an XLR on it. So I decided to make my own. This is just a cheap speaker that's been mounted inside of a drum shell that's got an XLR wired to it. I've put a 15 dB pad on this because it's so big, a diaphragm gives you a lot of output and clips most preamps. So I've put a pad on there. If your preamp has a pad, just switch it in. I wanted to do it this way to make sure that no matter what preamp I used it with, whether it had a pad or not, it would just work. And then this, because I've done this in a drum, I can now mount this onto something. I'm going to put this on something more elegant in the future, but by putting this on a drum stand on a tom arm, I can then mount this right in front of a kick drum. So now we're going to go through quite a lengthy but kind of Blue Peterish how-to section of how to actually make one of these yourself. So I'm going to cut the camera to me being at home with my soldering equipment, which I will say several times, I'm not the best soldering engineer in the world, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So on to that. Okay, so today we're going to make a Subkick. As you can see, I'm at home. I'm in a large room. It is fairly well ventilated, which is necessary because we're going to be doing a bit of soldering. I'm not the most amazing at soldering, so don't necessarily copy exactly what I'm doing there. If you want to learn how to actually solder properly, there are plenty of tutorials on YouTube. I just don't do it often enough, really, to get it absolutely perfect every time, although I try. So if I talk about pre-tinning things and that kind of thing, that's what we're going to do. So what we're going to need to turn what is just a speaker into this Subkick microphone. Firstly, I've made sure that the connections on the back of this speaker are clean and don't have much residue on. There is a little bit of residue on one of these, which I'm going to remove with the soldering iron just to make sure it's clean. We're going to be mounting this into an 8-inch drum. It's an 8-inch speaker. I have seen guys do this with a smaller speaker and a larger drum shell, using things like kind of L brackets, or even with bungee cords and kind of suspension mounting. I'm not going to be doing it that way. It's a bit clever for me. I'm going to keep this nice and simple. I bought a drum kit which wasn't particularly expensive, which had like 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 toms. And no one ever uses the 8 on my kit. So the first thing I did is I removed the 2 hoops, one of which is here, and the other one I've left at the studio, and removed the 2 skins off it. This also came with what I'm going to use, the mount here. This thing is what mounts the drum to a tom arm, which means it's going to be nice and easy to position this in front of the kick drum, which is like I've said all the way through this. That's why we're doing it this way, because I have this speaker mounted on a mic stand just with some zip ties, and it's really quite difficult to get that right. So what we're going to need is the speaker itself, the drum shell, some XLR cable, which I got from Studio Spares. We're going to need one of these, a male XLR connector, which we're going to solder on. And we're also going to need some solder. So I've got some flux cord solder here. I don't know if it's going to be the same in your country, but solder, just get decent quality solder if you can. And I'm also going to add a 15 decibel attenuator on the end of the cable while I mount it to the drum, because for me, with this particular speaker, and it may not be the same with your speaker, the signal is so hot coming off this, it's so loud, it clips any preamp that I plug it straight into, even with the gain at absolute minimum. And not every preamp has an inbuilt pad. So instead of an inbuilt pad, we're going to use this, which means that if the drummer absolutely smacks the kick drum on a particular hit, it won't clip the preamp, it'll just be louder than it was. I like to have things come into the preamps at -15, -18 kind of level, and this will help me achieve that. Also, just for neatness, I'm going to be using heat shrink tubing. This stuff, this is a particularly big one, it's quite a big piece of plastic, but what you do is you stick it over the end of whatever piece of cable you're using, so it's too big. And then when it's over and it's too big, when you've wired in your cable, you slip it over where you need, you apply some heat either with the soldering iron or with a gentle flame, and it shrinks and tightens up and means that your copper isn't then bare and it's not going to touch. So let's get cracking. Okay, so I have plugged in the soldering iron, so that's heating up. That's going to be a little while. So while that heats up, in the meantime, let's get ourselves some cable off this XLR. I do like purple cable, but to be honest, it makes absolutely no difference. So I'm going to make this quite a short cable, and so I'm just going to get my trusty snippers from my multi-tool and cut the whole thing. So there's plenty of cable for if I manage to screw this up, which there is some possibility. So the reason I only want a short piece of cable here is I'm not going to be adding a really long cable straight to this, because what we're going to do, I'm going to grab the speaker now, let's just sit it upside down here, and what we're going to do is we're going to mount one side here, and we're going to mount this side on the other side of the drum, on the end of this XLR, and then we're going to have this attenuator permanently plugged in and strapped to the side of that drum, so that the end of this sticks out the side of the drum at the back. That way we can plug another cable in and remove it at any time, and if that longer cable breaks,
which is what actually happened with this originally. We can just replace it, no problem. So yeah, that was a massive pain in the backside. When I originally got this, it was advertised as a Subkick. I got it in the post and it was just this with like a 5 or 6 meter cable soldered here, and that was it. What we're making here is a full functional unit where if a part of the cable breaks or anything like that, that shouldn't be a problem. And we're going to fix this inside the drum, and we're going to fix it outside the drum, and we're going to make sure that this doesn't move and is absolutely rigid and arguably never gets touched once it's been installed, which means that there's much less chance of a point of failure. First thing we're going to need to do is strip these ends. Just gently pinching. We don't want to strip the entire thing, we just want to take the outside off. So you see there's all this copper here. Want to take all this copper, twist it all together so that it becomes the third point of contact. If I get rid of this, you'll see now there's 1, 2, 3 points of contact, and that's what we want. Right, so that's not going anywhere. So the next thing that I need to do is put this into the drum. So I decided to mount it this way around so that the sound, the Pearl logo is there. I'm just plopping this in the top. Should probably move the camera so you can see what's going on. I'm not using the holes on the speaker. This, because it's an 8-inch speaker and an 8-inch drum, it just so happens that it all lines up perfectly, so that if I put this hoop over the top here, these all go on. So if I just make sure they're all in before I start lining it up. There we go. And start screwing this on. That's step 1 complete. So, I'm going to get this purple cable through this hole, which was originally the breathing hole of the drum. And one more thing that I think I'm going to do is that's plenty of connection. So inside here, I'm going to get one of my good old zip ties. Okay, ladies and gents, we are back after a brief interlude, and I've got a couple of extra things. So I've got some zip ties, one of my favourite things in the whole world. I have loads of these lying around, and I'm just spilling them on the table now because, oops. I also have a pair of scissors handy because of the way that this cable is made, with a kind of a cloth protection inside it. And yes, my other half has come home with the baby, who is teething. So if you hear any kind of in the background, that's her. So first thing we're going to do now we've sorted this cable out is we're going to cut this extra stuff off the cable to make it nice and clean. So what we're going to do, if you look really closely at this speaker, there's a minus and a plus sign right here. Not that we necessarily need that, but it might help keep us in phase. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the negative be the shield, we're going to have the positive be the red, and we're not going to use this one at all, the white one. I know that most microphones have a balanced connection. This isn't going to have that, unfortunately, but that's just the way that this works mechanically. And that's okay. I mean, the signal from this is going to be so ridiculously hot compared to most microphones that it doesn't really matter. One thing I'm going to do, seeing as I have this heat shrink available, I'm going to get my soldering iron plugged in now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of heat shrink and I'm just going to cut it down so it's not too long. I'm going to use these nice scissors. And I'm going to snip that and stick that over the end we're not using, just so that this tip here doesn't end up catching and making any short connections anywhere, because that would be a massive pain. And we're going to go ahead and just heat shrink that on there so that the end cannot make contact with anything. Now, I'm not trying to melt anything here, I'm literally just trying to make this warm enough that it shrinks the heat shrink on, never to come off again. Let's pre-tin these. All that really means is we get some solder and we heat up these ends and we put solder into the cable ends so that when we put them in, they don't just fall apart. There we go. If anyone's going to comment in the YouTube comments going, oh, you don't know what you're doing. Hey, I'm trying my best. And like I said, if you want to watch specific soldering tutorials, you are more than welcome and probably should. And if I find some time, I will as well. So this is definitely not a tutorial on how to do the best soldering in the world. So let's get these lined up. So positive one fits quite nicely. Let's heat this up and get this full of solder. Just wait till it heats. I might have to heat up my soldering iron a little because it's a variable temperature soldering iron. But that seems like a decent contact there. Okay, the remaining steps of this are going to be to take this cable, mount this connector to it, and then mount this connection around here. I was hoping not to modify the drum too much, but I've decided that since this thing's already been battered, this is a second-hand drum to begin with, I'm just going to go ahead and install these, drill a couple of holes around here, and then zip tie through the body so that it's all solid. So again, you get to witness my appalling cable stripping techniques and all that kind of good stuff. So first thing I'm going to do before any of that is I'm going to remove the parts of this cable and I'm going to stick these on here before I do anything, because I've made that mistake far too many times of doing all my stripping of all the cable and then it being a real mess and a real faff trying to get anything on properly after that. So I'm going to put a bit of heat shrink up here as well so I can really belt and braces the connection, because like I said, my style isn't the cleanest or the best. I wish it was, but I don't practice enough. And so on here, this is the XLR. We want to get pin 1 connected to that ground, pin 2 connected to the red, and pin 3 to not be connected at all. So when that's backwards, I need to remember that 1 is actually on the right, not the left. Or if I flip it over, 1 is back on the left again. That's where it gets really confusing, guys. Absolutely. Ending here will screw on, and we have a terminated XLR end, which if we put this on it, that snaps quite beautifully. That's the next bit. So from here I want to mount this to the side here. Now I'm going to do it with zip ties, but to do that I'm going to drill a few holes through the wood, which is not ideal, but is, you know, I'm never going to use this again as a drum. If you can find a better way to do this kind of mounting that doesn't damage a drum, go for it. But I would definitely recommend doing this with a drum you're never going to use again. Okay, so as we can see, this is now mounted to the side. It doesn't have any support going back to front, so I'll just have to make sure I hold it as I connect the cable. But now this is a drum and it's kind of floating, so what do? We get this bit, and this is where it gets really clever, because all I have to do now, if I'm let's see which way, so if I'm putting this in front of the drum like that, I probably want the cable on the left side to keep it out of the way of everything else, which means let me think. No, I want the cable on top because I'm going to mount the boom arm on the left. So I want this to clamp on here, and then I just tighten that up, and job is a good one. And we have one finished Subkick. So all we have to do now, there we go. So this tom arm here means it can be mounted floating in front of the kick with an XLR handily on the top and strapped down so there's no pressure points anywhere. There's a couple of loose bits of cable tie, but I'll chop them off, and that's job done. One last apology about the soldering because I'm not amazing at it, but if this works then I'll be happy, and I will endeavour in the future to learn how to be a better solderer. So back to me in the studio.
Now, I've got a project behind me with a band that I've just recorded with called Stereo Haze, and we used for the kick drum an Audix D6, which has a real nice kind of attack to it, which I brought out with a bit of top end EQ, but it's also very strong in the ultra low end and doesn't have much in the middle. Now, for something like metal, that's ideal, but for this kind of rocky type stuff, I really wanted to blend in this low end with the Subkick, and I find that a lot that I want to have. Not necessarily like 30 hertz or that kind of thing. The Subkick is really good for me at picking up sound around between, I don't know, 50 hertz and 300 hertz-ish. It naturally just kind of picks up that weight, which then blended in with a mic that has the sub stuff and the high stuff means that I have a really nice balance. So I'm gonna play you a little bit of this drum set here with the kick, just with the D6, then with the Subkick so you can hear what that does. Then I'm going to blend the Subkick in with the D6 so you can hear what it's doing. Now, making this probably didn't cost me very much at all. The speaker I got for £30, but it was already kind of wired into a long XLR cable. You can probably get one cheaper. I had the drum already because I bought a relatively inexpensive Pearl Export drum kit that had loads of toms, and I was never going to use this particular one. But if you've got some other mounting system, go for it. I did originally mount the speaker onto a mic stand directly, but I found that that was a real pain in the backside, which is why I made this. But it's not an expensive thing to do. Yamaha was selling their Subkick, which I think they've now discontinued, for £200 or more, hundreds of dollars, which is way too much in my humble opinion, when you can just make one of these. It's not the same as making a microphone, because like the diaphragm, I can just touch it, you know, it's not like a microphone where that damages it because it's a big, chunky, hefty thing. And this will probably keep on going for years to come. So hopefully this has inspired you to make your own, to expand your mic locker out with something a little different. Hope this has been helpful for you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks to all the patrons on Patreon for helping us out with making the channel, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.